In this student-to-student interview, I interviewed Debbie, who's an information security governance engineering expert in the financial technology industry. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College. Insight Center and this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation. My name is Philip Kreger. I'm a professor of cybersecurity at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. This video has been edited for time. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Kreger.
So, can you tell me your name and where do you work? Your industry?
My name's Debbie, and I work in financial technology. I've settled into financial technology, FinTech, over about the last 5 years. And I work mainly in what we call GRC, governance, risk, and compliance.
Okay.
But and how it within InfoSec.
And you've had some really nice jobs before this, but we might talk about that a little later. So what's your current title?
I have a very long title right now. I am an information security governance engineering expert.
Will that fit on a card?
It does.
It does. Okay. Very good. So what was your degree in?
My bachelor's degree was in, information technology engineering, I think. And then I also, from Daytona State, have a technical certification in cybersecurity and cyber forensics. I actively hold my CISSP, my CISA, and my CVPSE.
That's very impressive.
I think this year I'm going to switch targets and maybe go for a technical degree rather so much than governance. Okay.
Well, obviously you did well when you were in my classes. You were a tremendous student, and that's why I'm talking to you right now, because you were so good.
Thank you.
One of those students I remember. So can you tell me what your first job was after getting that degree from Daytona State College?
After I worked through the entire program, so I was already in the field,
okay,
so to speak, while I was working on my degree. But my first gig out of college was for a FinTech firm as a risk assessor on their enterprise technology team.
So I need to mention that Daytona State College is it's kind of like a community college with some bachelor's degree.
It is, and I was leery of putting all my eggs in a community college basket, so to speak. But really, what I found is that it's the quality of the professors, and really what you want to get out of it. If you just settle for a C, you're going to get a C-level education, whether it's Ivy League or community college. But if you really dig in and bug your professors a lot, you can really get a solid education.
Okay. All right. So now back on track. So for your current job, Debbie, what do you do? Can you tell me? You can tell me as much as you can.
Actually, recently somebody in a meeting called me the Queen of Controls, and I think that rather sums it up. I am the gatekeeper of technical controls for the InfoSec division for my company, and that involves designing them, implementing them, communicating them. Very important step, communicating your controls, and then kind of hand off the testing to somebody else. So I liaise between the federal regulators. Banking is very heavily regulated, and the external third-party auditors, and then the SMEs within our team, to make sure that we're doing what we're saying we're doing, and that's packaged to our advantage.
So that's very interesting, because I've done 2 other interviews with people who are in a more technical position, but you're in a very interesting position because you just used the word liaise, which means that you need to be able to pass information from one group to another. So can I ask you, how important is communicating to your audience? That is, being able to interpret something technical and manipulate it and explain it in a non-technical way to others. Is that important in your job?
No, it's vital. You will never be able to do, you won't survive in InfoSec if you cannot take very technical terms and translate it into business language for the executives, and then vice versa. I got into a meeting one time, we were discussing malware, and the poor gentleman, he just did not understand the technical terms, and I just looked at him, put my elbows on the table, and I'm like, think of it as cyber cooties. Which one breaks the ice?
Yeah.
And two, being able to use those soft skills to translate it's not just important. It's pivotal.
Thank you. That's what I try to teach in my classes.
Oh, you did very well.
Can you say that one more time?
You did very well.
Oh, thank you. So what did you learn in college that prepared you for your first job or your current job? Maybe your current job.
We had the program that I was in at Daytona State it touched almost every facet of cybersecurity, from the engineering and the architecting down to the operations side of things. And having that balance, especially in the lab, having that balance, for me in compliance, what that allows me to do is connect the dots between architecture, engineering, operations, so that you can get a holistic look at how the players interact. Because to develop a defense in depth strategy, you really need all of those pieces. And I don't use things like calculating throughput on a day-to-day basis, but I do know that it needs to be done, else you have these problems as they trickle down the OSI. Mm-hmm. So really the labs were invaluable, and then that breadth of education.
Debbie, what about your job surprised you once you started working in your current position? Or it could be another position you've had.
What has shocked me the most has been a deviation from very, very basic principles in the security operations, engineering, not so much engineering, but the operations. Like I said, I'm in compliance, and I've assessed everything from firewalls to IDS to SIMs to all of it, and I have seen some weird things. What surprises me most is that cybersecurity 101 just, it seems to be missing. I've met administrators who do not have passwords. Not right.
Okay.
Not just good passwords. They don't have passwords because it's too much trouble to log into your system and have to re-enter your credentials. So that kind of I've got to get my work done faster at any cost. That surprises me, because I see the flip side of that is what happens when you miss those very simple steps.
Have you seen that in other positions you've held, or just your current?
Oh, it's not this position. it was several years ago, but that same basic deviation from the very, very simple steps really shocks me. And the problem that professionals in engineering and architecture have communicating that buying a new tool is not going to save you. You cannot just throw money at a problem. That has been shocking, that I've seen from executive C levels that will buy this tool and see how great this will be. No, that tool will do you no good if you do not enforce very simple controls, passwords, usernames, everything in between. That deviation from cybersecurity 101 it floors me. Every day it floors me.
So it sounds like that cybersecurity is a continuous process. It's not a one and done.
Absolutely. I would be out of a job if it were a one and done, because I'd go in and tell people what to fix. They'd fix it. Nothing would change. And I'd be a contractor and bouncing around. But no, it always evolves. We have to constantly keep up with the criminals. They will come up with new and exciting ways every day to get in and wreak havoc in your system. And as the technology changes, when I graduated, for example, we didn't do a whole lot of cloud, and that was 5 years ago. So right now, that's the big push, is cloud security, because everything moved to the cloud, especially last year. And if you don't update your security practices to accommodate for those new controls, you're sunk.
So,
I read about, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I read about recently Amazon Sidewalk that will kind of expand your home Wi-Fi footprint.
Right.
See, and you're nodding because you see where I'm going with
Yep.
this. And as we continue to work from home, that gives us, tens of thousands of new attack vectors that need to be protected. So, those are things that have just come up recently. Third-party risk, when you talk about solar winds and things like that have just in the last couple of months. Third-party supply chain risks, that opens up a whole new category. And so you've got to constantly stay on your toes.
Yeah, who would have thought that a software backup could software update could cause problems for so many agencies?
A validated software. That's
validated, signed with a certificate.
It was validated, signed by the vendor. So, that was ugly.
And this is just what we know about. I mean,
right?
they don't. The news doesn't necessarily publish, nor do the affected actually come out and say, "Look, we were hacked."
Oh yeah, nobody wants to say that.
Right.
Nobody wants to say that.
Let me ask you about training and education programs at the companies where you've worked. Do the companies where you've worked provide cybersecurity training, education, and awareness programs for staff and for all their workers?
See, and I'll smile when I say this because they do technically, because it's a requirement.
Yes.
However, I've not seen it done very well. I don't think the company that I'm at really does amazingly well at phishing simulations. They are the best that I've seen. But most of the time, it comes down to dollars and cents. If there's not a great deal of return on investment, then it's not getting done. And all you have to do to pass an exam or an audit is to have something that's good enough. And good enough is not always good enough.
Right. So, as I tell my students, businesses are in business to make money. And if there is no return on investment, like you've said, why should they spend money on that? Until they're hacked, then it costs them a lot of money.
Oh, I'm big on that, because I'm not in a revenue generating cost center. Never have been. Mm-hmm. And that is exactly how I like to put it. It's like, well, when you get hacked because you didn't put a password on that, or because you didn't do an access review and weed out somebody that was disgruntled and fired, and they still have their access. If you don't blacklist some of these websites, which are, I mean, these are cheap controls. We're not even talking about expensive things. But if you don't do those, then it's real easy for somebody to just cause so much trouble in your systems.
What are companies doing that are opening themselves up to security issues? And you've already mentioned some of those. Are there other ones you want to talk about?
Oh, they're not hiring. I mean, they are, but they're not hiring enough. We could, the company that I'm at right now went through a cyber attack last year. And before then, there were maybe 20 people running the InfoSec program. And I mean down to the technicians, 20 people. We're a global company. We have hired now hundreds, easily 100 people, and just in my department, and deployed several new tools and programs just to now lock the door after the barbarians have gotten in, because now it's a priority. I don't think businesses don't proactively look at cybersecurity like it's going to make them money, but I can save you a ton of money if you just implement some of these very Cyber 101 controls. Just changing your password, guys.
And those Cyber 101 things that you're talking about are the core of what they really learn at the community college level.
It is. It's the first thing that you learn. Really, by about the first semester, you have enough to ward off 80% of the cybersecurity problems that you have. Not so much the super technical stuff that takes a lot more training, but it doesn't take too long, and it sure doesn't cost a whole lot of money. By about the first 3 courses, I was able to get a job in information security, just because I had enough to get through the interview, and the rest of it you learn on the job and then in your classes. So I try to explain to people it's not rocket science. A lot of the basics are pretty common sense. So
one would think.
One would think.
Yes. Debbie, how can companies prepare themselves against the current cyber threats like ransomware?
Ransomware is particularly pernicious because it comes in. The biggest thing with ransomware is to have those really robust, keep security on the top of everybody's mind all the time, every day. Because I failed my last phishing exercise. It was very, very well constructed, and people don't generally get me, but you're scanning your emails, you're reading through documents, you're trying to do 8 million things at once, and all it takes is that little tiny distraction, and boom, now you've clicked on a link, and now he's in.
Yep.
And from there, all you need to do is start traversing the directories. So then it comes to really technical controls. Are your password files encrypted? Are they stored on a separate system? Also important. Your firewall rules, your access controls, your naming conventions. I talked to somebody once and they said, well, yeah, all of our admins append ADM to the front of their username. I'm like, that's great. Guess where I'm going? When I get into your system, guess where I'm going? I'm going to hack them. I don't need the rest. I don't need the other 600 people. I just need you. And it's simple things that people do to make their life easier because there's just not enough cyber professionals to go around. So being able to get this kind of education at a community college that was super accessible and world class was invaluable to me.
Debbie, do you have an interesting story about cybersecurity you can tell us in any of your jobs? And I know that you work in a very sensitive position, so it's not easy to give maybe a.
Oh, I've got one. When I mentor people, this is the story that I tell them, and it'll be long, but you'll get to the punchline eventually. My very first day in a classroom setting towards this degree, I had just finished up my associates in culinary management, which is a weird path, but bear with me. And we were introducing ourselves, and we got to me, and I said, "Hi, my name's Debbie. I just graduated from the culinary management program." And some punk in the back row chimed in and said, what in the world are you doing here? Because being the oldest person in the class and the only woman certainly isn't bad enough. Now I've got hecklers. But my very first job out of college, I applied for a position that was a little bit of a stretch, and I got to my interview, and the very first question out of that hiring manager's mouth was, "I'm reading your resume. I see that you were the captain of the culinary team." I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "This is great. We're all foodies on this team." And it was 45 minutes of that interview was about not technical. It was about food and eating and living and getting to know people as people. So that culinary degree actually landed me a job that took me around the world. Wow. Literally around the world. 4 continents in 2019, and was the best experience of my life. So I like to me, that's the most interesting thing, is that your people skills, your soft skills, will take you just as far as any of your technical skills. When I had a manager tell me once that she could teach me any kind of technical skill I wanted, and I had to learn a lot, because we did things from administrative controls with policies and testing background check procedures, which is also important, down to firewalls and logging and monitoring and backups and data centers. So I can learn all of that. And what she said she couldn't teach me is how not to be an asshole. So, and I'll re-record that with something nicer, but that's something that she couldn't teach anybody, is I can't teach you how not to be a jerk. And especially in my profession, nobody likes to see the auditors coming. Nobody. So you need very good people skills. And that comes from not just the technical classes. It comes from the psychology classes, from the speech classes, from that holistic university education. Without all of those pieces to the puzzle coming together, you're just unprepared for the big scary world of business.
So you make a good point. It's not, you get technical skills at the community college level, but also in those classes there should be things like learning how to communicate and how to work with teams. Work with other people, because you're always going to be having to work with somebody else. That cybersecurity isn't a solitary job.
Always. And I hated that. And I still hate it. The team projects that every class forces you to do. Absolutely hated it. However, it was super, super useful, because you are never just working on your own. You always have to coordinate and communicate, and yeah, your success will depend on whether so-and-so turns in his deliverable on time or not. And those, if these students will take advantage of it instead of just grumbling through it and doing all the work themselves like I did, if they will take advantage of those opportunities in those team projects to learn how to manage people and ride them like a dog to get your work in. Or I will, same thing I do in my day-to-day job now, I will escalate you to management, which is the professor.
That's perfect. Yeah, I have a semester-long project for my cyber forensics course, and they're teams of 3 or 4, and I have one leader, and I think at the end there's some that fail, the teams fail, and then others do well. But I tell them it's better to fail. When I mean fail, they don't fail the class, but they don't do well in the project. It's better to not do well here than to go out and get your job and fail there. You're here to learn, and it's okay to fail as long as you progress and learn from your failures.
That's so true. So true, because, I have a mortgage now that relies on my ability to keep my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that I got a lot of that experience that I can reach back to. Some of it I didn't even know I was learning. But you can reach back to it and say, oh, I know you. You're that guy on that team project that wouldn't pull his weight. So how did I deal with you then? And can I deal with you the same way now? It comes in so handy. You don't think it does at the time. You just get mad because you're the only one doing the work. But when you get into, a project is one thing. When you get into the real world, there is way too much work for you to do yourself. And if you don't learn how to delegate it, you're sunk. You're sunk, and you're working all on the weekends and holidays.
Which is never good.
Never good.
Never
That's
good.
why I got into audit instead of operations.
Okay, Debbie, I have one last question for you. What advice would you give to current cybersecurity students while they're going through their program or where they're looking for a job?
Well, while they're going through the program, do not settle for your C, because you will be up against malicious actors who will not give you an inch. You passing that test with a 70 will get your company breached. It's just as plain and simple. One, I was too cheap. I was paying hundreds of dollars for these credit hours, and I was going to get everything out of it that I could. And that attitude has served me well. Do not settle for a C. Your opponents will not settle. They won't stop at a C. But when you're going for your job, don't be afraid to reach a little higher and maybe look for things that are in your field, but not exactly maybe what you wanted to do. I never wanted to be an auditor. I wanted to be in forensics. I wanted to analyze PCAPs for the rest of my life, and that would have done me just fine. But what I found was shifting my goals, shifting my gaze a little bit, enabled me to really use a lot of these talents. And then I would encourage them to get used to learning all the time. Just all the time. Don't think that once you have your degree, your certificate, you can't stop learning, because everything changes. It's a totally different world than it was 2 years ago. And I don't think those kind of changes are going to stop, and you need to be prepared.
So that's interesting. You're the third interview, and everybody has said the same thing. It's a continuous learning process, which is nice because it means your job isn't boring. Stressful, but not boring.
No, there are days I wish it were a little bit more boring, but no. And that's, I think that's why employers like to see supplements on your resume with certifications, because all of these certifications require continuing education credits, all of them. So there's that. It's built in, if you know what I mean.
Right.
That if you've got your CISSP, you'll do 120 hours of continuing education every 3-year cycle, or you have to sit for that exam again, which was awful.
No, not again.
No, not
I would not do that again.
I will be on my deathbed in a nursing home worrying about those CPEs because I will never sit for that test again. That was brutal.
At the same time, though, it was meaningful because it was brutal. Does that make sense?
It was awesome, and I don't know if maybe it's being a woman in cyber or being an old woman in cyber.
You're not old.
I raised my kids before I went to college, so I was always the oldest person in the class. So, and these guys think that they've got a little edge, but it was really a great validation. I finished my exam in 45 minutes. So
did you take a written exam or did you take the online adaptive exam?
It was an adaptive exam, and the company had procured a boot camp for us in February in Wisconsin. So it was cold, so cold, and we went to the boot camp, and then we stayed Saturday and sat for the exam. And of the team of 30, 3 passed. So
well,
it's on my wall in my office.
I would have no doubt that you would pass. Debbie, thank you so much for lending your time and your knowledge and your experience. This is very important for students that are going through these programs that are listening to a professor, but the professor may not be able to impart what's actually happening on the job, or looking back at what very successful students like yourself have learned and being able to learn from them so that they don't go through the same mistakes.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. We all want to give back to the younger generation because they're the ones who are going to help us do our jobs. So,
and I want to say,
please raise good ones.
Thank you. I want to say one more thing is that you were chosen because you are super bright, super accomplished, and also female. And there's not a lot of there's no 50-50 representation in cyber now. I'm seeing it's growing, but we need people like you to kind of lead the way.
There's not. In fact, we had an all hands call I think at the beginning of this week. And it's not something that I actively scan for, but out of the 50 people on the call in InfoSec, I am the only woman on the team. There's lots of nationalities, lots of ethnicities, folks from all over the world, every race, size, color, and creed, but I'm still the only woman in cyber. And it's a lonely place to be sometimes.
Yeah, I can imagine. But I don't think that you will have any trouble because you are de facto a role model for what you've done. And you lead by example.
Oh, thank you. I hope so.
You do.
I hope so.
That's why you were asked to do this interview, is because I'm thinking, who are my best students?
Well, and it's one of those things. People underestimate, like that jerk in that first day of class. They look at you and all they see is woman and they don't see smart. Which was really, and actually there is an interesting story to that too. We were, a teammate of mine and I were auditing, I was training him, and we were auditing somebody on Active Directory. We were auditing the Active Directory team. So all the authentication, super nasty technical stuff there. And we wrapped up and we were sitting at the airport and I said, what did you think? And he said, you come across as the sweetest, most Southern belle, Pollyanna, and by the end of your question, you have sucker punched them. So, don't ever underestimate your opponent.
There's your private self, like the sweet person you are, but there's also the professional self, which you can turn on like a light switch.
There has to be. There has to be. And you know, and I've had people tell me before, oh, I didn't mean to tell you that. I forgot you were auditing me. So, you know.
Oh, that's part of your toolbox.
A little bit of social engineering.
The sweet Southern belle. Well,
right.
Debbie, thank you so much again, and I wish you the best.
It's my pleasure. Anytime, and anytime any of your students has a question, I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you. This video has been brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College.